Good morning and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. In recent weeks, there have been a number of conferences that have not elected to cancel all of their fall seasons, but just some of their fall seasons. And so I was thinking about this and invited a colleague of mine who's a public health scholar and also somebody who loves sports to kind of have an interesting discussion about what our takes are on why sports are canceled or allowed to participate in the era of COVID-19. So my guest is Ross Akins, and Ross teaches college student health at the University of Pennsylvania. And he and I have had a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek conversation around those sports that we try and hope that will come back and what the reality is for them actually coming back. So this is meant to be taken in a very lighthearted way, and we certainly hope that you get a smile out of this conversation. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Today, I'm joined by Ross Akins. Ross is a colleague of mine at the University of Pennsylvania. He is an adjunct assistant professor and the program manager of the Higher Education Division inside of the Graduate School of Education at Penn. And he and I have been great banterers about what's going on in the sports world, what sports might be good to try to implement under COVID-19, what sports we both agree on we should go nowhere on. And there are some sports where he thinks one way and I think the other. So to take a break from all the seriousness of the podcast, we decided to allow you to listen in on some of our conversations about the return of sports to the 2021 academic year. Ross, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Karen. This is a real treat. I think you aptly described we love bantering about college sports. Yeah, I think that pretty much nails it in terms of how I want this conversation to be and what we're prepared for going forward.
So, Ross, you have some athletic credentials yourself, so please let us know what those are.
I do. Well, mostly, and I think this is why you and I sort of hit it off, is I'm a big fan of sports, professional and, of course, college sports. I always liked basketball to play a lot, but I was sort of better at swimming and water polo. I'm wearing right now a Stanford Club water polo t-shirt. So I think I probably peaked in high school. I was pretty good, but then I went to play Division III varsity water polo at Occidental College. And it's funny, collegiate water polo is a little different because there's not a lot of teams. It's very regional. And so we would play these powerhouse teams like Pepperdine or Long Beach State. And so it's almost like Duke basketball playing Occidental College in basketball or something. So it was a real shellacking. But I was the goalie, so I saw lots of action either way. So,
See, another reason why we get along, I too was a goalkeeper. I was a goalkeeper in field hockey.
That's right. I forgot you were a goalie in field hockey too. Well, I was only a junior Olympian. You were a real Olympian. So some difference in our peaks. But yeah, and since then, just paying attention to the landscape of college sports, maybe not the depth you have, but I always love waxing sports for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So to help our listeners understand our very detailed, precise measuring system, we've decided to go with three colors, red, yellow, and green, kind of like a traffic light, to say, right, what sports do we think have, at least should be considering returning in the fall of 2020? What sports we think have a lot of hiccups, and those would be yellow in terms of their return, and what sports that we say there's absolutely no way on this earth those sports should think about returning, and those would be red lights. Is that how you see it, Ross?
That's pretty much it. Yeah, the green lights, you don't really need to do too much. We see a pretty foreseeable path forward. Yellow, maybe with some modification, with testing, maybe there are aspects of the sport that make them less risky than a red light sport, but give us a little more concern than a green light sport. And then red is just, it's hard to see a path going forward with what we know about COVID transmission at this point.
Absolutely. And again, we're doing this at the end of July. So in certain conferences, there have been multiple decisions made already, particularly on schools that don't have quite the resources in terms of testing and tracing and facility cleaning. So some schools have already made these decisions, but we are still looking at the Power Five and much of the Division I landscape still trying to decide what they're going to do. And I noticed even today, Ross, that some Division II programs have elected to move forward with non-contact sports, but to close down what they deem as contact sports. So perhaps they're guidelines will be, we will use those to inform our discussions here today as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is a ball in motion, so to speak, pun intended there. In terms of like some conferences are trying to be more regional with travel. Also, we're seeing some professional leagues, these sort of the test cases, some of which, who are very well resourced, like European soccer, the NBA, are doing pretty well with these biosecure bubble environments. That's a luxury that I don't think any sort of college league or division has proposed. But then you have baseball. And as of this recording, we just heard that a number of Miami Marlins are here in Philadelphia being quarantined because of an outbreak within their team. So, it's a real mixed bag in terms of success that even these really well-resourced professional leagues are dealing with.
Absolutely. So let's start with our red, yellow, green metric and start with our fall sports. So why don't you start with whatever one sport you want to talk about, and we'll go down the list.
Well, I think we should probably start with the big one. And I think it's, football is, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm pretty sure I'm not, that it is our biggest revenue sport that we have.
Correct, yes.
And I think I'm paraphrasing Tony Kornheiser when he said that football is a fountain, a geyser of spittle and particulate. It is really big teams. I mean, football, and let's put it, I am a football fan, a fan of collegiate football, and my brother played football. I do have some concerns about the game. I have two young boys. My partner is a neuroscientist, so I really doubt that our kids will play football for reasons related to concussions and brain science. Nonetheless, it's a fantastic sport that I very much enjoy, and so I'm rooting for it to be safe and to return. I just don't see a way forward, Karen. This is a glaring red light for me for a lot of different reasons. I think it combines huge roster sizes. You have lots and lots of players on a team, huge coaching staffs. They're all in close contact just with the nature of the game. It is outdoors, and I do understand, I think, spiritually what football means to college sports, especially in parts of the country. Everybody's rooting for it. It's just, I don't see any way that this is going to be anything other than a red light.
I have to agree with you. I think there's be other situations where we're going to disagree, but I have to agree with you. And anybody who's read any of my Forbes articles, let's say in the last 2 months, probably will understand why I think this way. But I highlight the testing and the tracing, the role of all of our college campuses inside of our communities. Our communities, need access to the healthcare systems that, if we were to create an outbreak within a football program, that would stress our local community hospitals. So I'm right with you there.
Yeah, I think as of this time, Rutgers had an incident very recently, the past several days, where there was an outbreak on their team. And I think we're likely to see this, Karen. I know that I think the Pac-12, who I'm repping right now, they did sort of the regional plan for staying in conference or half conferences. I don't think that's nearly good enough, unfortunately. And it is unfortunate.
And you look at the Pac-12 as a region. I mean, Washington State down to Arizona, where are some of the biggest hot outbreaks right now? Arizona and Southern California. I don't know how, if you're not going to have regular schools, how do you insulate the athletes from the rest of the environment? It's impossible.
Really tough to do. Poor football. Well, do you want to move on to the next one, or?
We could move on, yes.
All right, this is a great pace. I'm just sort of getting the sense for the pace of this. Well, the upside, here's our next one. I think this is a green light. So the next one is cross country. This is our first. Actually, no, I take that back. I had a yellow light for cross country, but maybe it's a yellowish green. I think it's doable. The thing about cross country is running in packs is not ideal. You have to stagger runners across different intervals to sort of space the field a little bit. And you'd also have to arrange courses in a rate so that runners aren't sort of running around a hairpin turn. So they're basically not just doubling back on the same course, because then you have situations where runners are running directly in the path of one another. So you can't do that because you want to avoid any situation where you're breathing heavily, having people running by each other. But I think it's doable.
So I'm in a definite yellow category on this one, because I've actually talked to a couple of cross-country coaches, and they know what the battle is with elbowing and trying to get one step in front of the other, and the chances of bumping into people. While it's nice to think about a leisurely jog along Kelly Drive, There's just too many ways for cross-country runners to come into contact with each other. So I think in terms of the construction of the sport and the way it's competed, I think a yellow is definitely on call for this.
This might be a sport also where you can do things with technology. The way they put trackers and bibs and whatnot, you could probably find an accurate way to track runners so that they're really not running synchronously at all with one another. So yeah, but I think there's challenges. I actually did put yellow down, even though, just coming over from football, I think I was just so eager to hear some green. So
something.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
All right. So the next on my list, Karen, I'm going to defer to you. This is your sport. So field hockey. What do you think about field hockey?
So I really struggle with field hockey because I love the game dearly, but as a goalkeeper, I know what the scrum is like in front of the cage, and the desire to score a goal and to dig on the ground and try to get the ball lifted over the goalkeeper. It's too easy for that kind of stuff to happen. And I think we also have another variable in this that I have not read any conclusive research on yet, and that is the condition of the fields, particularly artificial turf fields.
Oh,
we don't know whether those are really kept as clean. I can tell you what I've witnessed on artificial turf fields, and you wouldn't want to ever sit on them again. So the question of whether they are a clean surface, and you've got all the other surfaces like the benches and any fences around the field and those kinds of areas. So I have it in a strong yellow, but not necessarily. I think actually what I would probably encourage is that if field hockey really wanted to play, they would play with 7 players instead of 11, because it would space the game out even more and let the ball do more of the work rather than the players doing the work. So that's my take.
That is interesting. Well, let me ask you a question. What is sort of the proportion in college field hockey of indoor to outdoor? Like, is it all outdoor?
No, there's a very strong competitive indoor season around the world, but it's in a much smaller area. It's more like an indoor soccer court. So it's usually 5 players plus a goalkeeper, or it could be just 5 players total. And it's very much a different strategy in that sport.
Got it. Yeah, that is sort of a medium in terms of the roster size being a risk factor. Individual sports being a lot difficult than basketball, football. Football's with really big team rosters. Interesting. So what's your lighting? Because I left this blank, Karen. This is not even my scorecard because I was
I'm thinking if you're going to go 11 aside on a turf, I'm thinking that's the worst possible scenario. That maybe grass is better, but even grass playing across the field rather than the length of the field, where you're playing with fewer players, might be the best.
Yeah. So is it red light for you?
Red light if you're on turf, 11 aside. Yellow light if you're playing 7 aside across the field.
All right.
Okay.
That's a good hit. I like it. So I didn't even think about turf or sort of grass considerations, but that also would be something for our next one, which is soccer.
Yeah.
So soccer, I'll just lead with the light. I had this as a red light too. It does have a big roster size. It's a lot of running. It's a lot of breathing really hard. There is obviously contact in soccer. We didn't really the early part, we thought that a contact transmission was a real risk factor. It turns out that's not as much of a risk in outdoor spaces in terms of the ball getting sweat on it, somebody sneezing on the ball or a goal post, and that's not as risky, but still the breathing, people being in close proximity, running into each other, big rosters as well. This is where we've actually seen the professional leagues do, so that there's the Bundesliga, La Liga. They have these bubbles they're working with, which is so far working in Europe, but the situation in Europe is also a lot right now better than what we're dealing with here in America. So all this comes into my ultimate verdict, which I can't see how this is anything other than a red light either, sadly, because I played and loved the beautiful game when I was growing up too. So.
Yeah, I really love soccer. It is a beautiful game, but Europe is light years ahead of where we are. They were one of the earliest ones to close down their soccer because they were having so many infections. But here's where I worry about it: is not so much in the game itself, but in the transition of the players into the locker rooms.
Right.
on the college level, there are very few teams that can totally separate their visiting teams from their home teams in terms of going in and out of doors, sharing training rooms, equipment rooms, that type of thing. So I think the chances are higher when you're mixing those size of teams in those spaces, not outside, but inside when they go in for halftime or other kinds of things. So that's what I worry about.
Yeah, I share those same fears. I think it's a medium to larger roster as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, for all those reasons, I think red as well. Now there is the magic spray. Have you seen the magic spray? A player goes down, and they little bit of spritzer. Seems the professionals they're now a lot of this is a stall tactic.
Yeah, right.
But what if you could make that some sort of sanitizer spray? If there's one sport that's used to having players being regularly doused with an aerosol mist, soccer. So maybe that's a creative opportunity for college sports. I don't know. Just trying to think out the box here.
You're sounding dangerously like our president who wants us to inject bleach.
Don't let the light in your body, Karen. I won't either. But yeah. That's great. So soccer, women's volleyball next is what I've got.
Yeah. Volleyball, again, a tough sport. First off, it's indoor, right? And we're going to have a whole other discussion about indoor. There's a lot of contact with the ball. I mean, there's just probably more contact with volleyball in terms of hands and faces because of where you play the ball. That really makes the sport very difficult to monitor. So I'm going to give it a red light.
Yeah, it's a red light for me too. I consulted with my partner on this, and she was an intercollegiate volleyball player who had brought up some really interesting points. It's really risky for the frontline players. So your blockers, there's probably more technical term than tallies and smallies, but you've got the blockers, you've got the setters.
With the blockers, that's good.
Right. And because they are right at the net, right in front of each other. That net it's a very porous net. You know, you could really fit a baseball through the gaps there. They're really right up to each other. Rosters are sort of medium sized, but it is an indoor sport where you have contact. You have people breathing directly in front of you. It might be a sport. Now, you mentioned some modifications you can make to make field hockey safer. This is one where you could have players wearing masks. You're breathing hard. It's a very tough sport, but it's not as maybe aerobically intensive. So masks could help in some way or another. It might not be the most comfortable thing, but it's still a red light for me.
Yeah, and two other things that I would point out, again, with the players being so close, even if the masks are on, they'd have to be fitted completely over the nose and the mouth to not project something into the eyes. I know of at least one reporter who flew on a plane and he was completely masked up, but he didn't have his eyes protected. And he says, I'm convinced that's where I got it, is it came in through my eyes. The other thing is in volleyball, you have two referees, and one is standing up on a ladder right next to the net so that he can see the net fouls that come down. So and he has a whistle. And so we know that when there's a lot of concern now about whistles blowing things out. So what position is he in?
That is fascinating. I have not thought about whistle innovations and how much spittle. Do you remember that World Cup I think it was the South Africa World Cup where vuvuzelas were those horns, which are basically spit funnels. The people, and also they're catchers of saliva as well. So if that would have been one of the worst sort of confluences of an instrument, a regional instrument in a pandemic. But I hadn't thought about whistles in athletics kind of doing the same thing, projecting some sort of particulate. Gosh, that is interesting.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, I like volleyball.
I do too. And you know what the happy thing is? We have beach volleyball coming up in the spring. So this could be a real growth opportunity for beach volleyball here.
All right. Are we on the winter sports now?
No, we've got mine. We've got.
Sorry. Go ahead.
It's all right. No, that's for last, maybe. No, these are all great sports, by the way. We're a fan of all sports. So I also just want to disclaim that you know, just because we're fans, we're rooting for the young women who play these sports, and we really feel for them. I would be heartbroken if it was such a part of my identity, I couldn't play, in this case, water polo, which sadly for me is a red light. Now, this is our first aquatic sport, and pools are generally sterile environments. They are. But water polo it's a real physical sport. It is, you know, one of the toughest sports. in terms of there's a lot of grabbing and wrestling underwater. You're breathing. You're really close people's heads into contact. Also, in the course of practices, you're really close to people. I mean, the way that water polo, and I know it's not the most common sport in every state in America, it's pretty heavy and popular on the coasts, but it really plays a lot more like basketball with a net and a goalie. A lot of people think of it like soccer because there is a net and a goalie, but no, the way it works. And so you think about a center in basketball whose back is to the basket and posting somebody up. That's essentially the 2-meter man. So that is just by the nature of the sport, a very risky place to be. I don't see any way around it being a red light, even though these chlorinated pools should be pretty sterile environments. Yeah, I've got red.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you on the red too, but for different reasons. When the coach calls timeout and brings all the athletes over to the edge of the pool and wants to strategy, you've got problems because you're bringing the bench players down. The coach is usually, kneeling or squatting next to the edge of the pool.
For sure.
It's just problematic on so many levels.
This is great. That was a point. I didn't even think about that, Karen. This is what I'm supposed to know the most about. So, yeah, red. That's a really good point too. Smaller, sort of player rosters, but you got these deep benches. Fantastic sport. I hope it comes back soon.
Absolutely.
So I'll have to tally this up later when we're talking about the next one. But I think I counted 6 sports. We've got 5 red, just 1 yellow, with maybe a yellowish red for field hockey.
Yeah.
So it's not looking good this fall. A lot of red.
Good. No.
Maybe winter will be better.
I hope so, but I'm not overly optimistic. But let's start off with winter sports. What do we got?
Well, first, I think just to keep this conversation on the same plane of just to make sure we're sort of apples to apples. We're hoping, of course, the COVID situation improves ASAP.
Exactly.
But there's reason also to believe that more glass half empty and that it won't. So we're just going to assume that the same variables that applied to fall will apply, because obviously if a vaccine comes around, this is a completely different conversation. But in the interest of sort of projecting forward based on what we know now, the first one on my list is basketball.
Yeah. Oh boy, we have so many problems with basketball. Again, just like you said with water polo, how closely the athletes guard each other, the huddles. I watched the TBT, the basketball tournament, which was the professional 3-on-3, win $1 million if you win the tournament kind of deal, that they used athletes in Columbus, Ohio. They quarantined them, test them, and then it was regular basketball. And you just watch how the athletes and the coaches perform. You go back into your normal behaviors when you're competing, because that's what's gotten you to this place. And that's exactly the problem with basketball.
It's a great point. I mean, more what you said about the way that athletes just subconsciously return to what you've been trained to do. That applies to just about any sport. And so it's kind of unfair to athletes to assume that they'll change the way they play the game or make themselves less competitive just because there's something subconscious. I don't think anybody's thinking about a pandemic when you're, enjoying something you love so much. It's a red light for me too. It's just it's been my favorite sport. I'm really excited the NBA is coming back, but you have to do something really drastic, like make this really secure bubble or campus, like what the NBA and these other sort of these summer leagues have done. I don't think any college or sport has that in their plans.
I think you're right. And I think it's almost impossible on a college campus anyway.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Oh, bummer.
I know.
We'll see. You have until March. I don't know. Fingers crossed. And again, one of the things that could also really change any sport landscape is improved testing. You have to have lots of testing, but I still think that basketball is one of the trickier ones.
Yeah.
Okay. And you'll have to tell me more about this one in terms of the NCAA, because I actually was not aware that bowling was an NCAA sport.
Yes, but it is. Bowling is an emerging sport, and it's played by a lot of Division II schools. It's an interesting sport because it all depends on the way the lanes are cleaned, and also the air circulation inside of the alleys or the competing facilities.
Right.
Not too many campuses have their own bowling lane, so they have to go off campus and trust that somebody else is going to do the cleaning that's appropriate.
That's a good point.
And also make sure that all the touch points are constantly cleaned.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a yellow, but I think you really have to trust on the operators of the facilities.
I didn't think about it. I had yellow too. The key thing preventing it from being green is that it is indoors, and there's no way to get it. You are contacting surfaces. Yeah, I mean, again, it's sort of an individual sport. I mean, you do have a team of bowlers, but you could space them out throughout a facility so that they're not crossing paths, so that not more than one person is in the lane any given time. Yeah, it's a yellow light for me too.
Yeah, I think so. I think so.
Next one I've got is a sport that seems premised on social distance, fencing.
I'm going to give a green yellow to fencing, again, because the fencers themselves can control how their equipment is taken care of. The officials are far enough away, and in fact, there's a lot of technology that goes into fencing.
Yep.
And as long as you've got an open enough space, which fencers tend to fence inside of large open spaces, I think it has possibility. What do you think?
I also had green, but at one point it was yellow on my Word document that has been edited a lot recently when doing research. I wonder if you take the two fencers and you sort of the tip of is that 6 feet? I did not do that little bit of research. I don't know.
No, I would think we could get to 6 feet. Yes.
But they're already wearing masks,
right.
And so you can make sure that that's even more sort of impermeable to, various sort of transmittable things. The protective equipment, it's an individual sport. It is indoors, but it doesn't need to be indoors. You could find a way to do it in some sort of setup outdoors. So yeah, I have fencing as green too.
Yeah. So we have hope.
We do have hope. The next one, this is interesting. We can take a little more time with this because it's one of these sports that's really a lot of different sports. It's gymnastics.
Oh boy.
Yeah. And I'll sort of give you some time to ruminate about this, but my notes, I have it as probably red, but it really depends. I have it as a red light mostly because of the practicing. There's a lot of physical contact between coaches and spotters. When you have gymnasts tumbling around, it's also indoors. There's no way to make this exclusively outdoors. But it could be yellow for some events. I think in competition, it's one of these sports that's really an individual sport masquerading as a team sport. Everybody is scored together, but there's really just one competitor at the floor at any given time, unless there's team elements that I'm just blanking on. But you can really do these competitions that could be yellow or even green. But to get to that point, all the training, all the contact, I think that's why I put it down as red ultimately.
Yeah, I think all of it goes back to the training that you do, and gymnasts are some of the hardest, most exact athletes that I know. And everything is about feeling your body in space. And the only way to feel your body is to have either a harness or to have somebody there with you, literally touching you and moving you through that space. Plus, here's a word we haven't used yet, but fomites. There are fomites everywhere in the gym that would need to be cleaned on a regular basis. So do you have some sort of spraying mechanism to clean all those surfaces in bulk? I mean, I'm thinking particularly about those pits that have all the foam blocks in them where they just—
I know what you're talking about, right.
Yeah,
oh
exactly.
My goodness.
I'm thinking about those things, yes.
Yeah, I mean, this is where our thoughts about contact transmission have gone down. But when you have these things that are like sponges for whatever, you're right that raises an important concern about sterilization. Now, I'm sure you've been in some gyms, as have I, where that wouldn't be a bad thing to make those things a little bit cleaner.
No.
Just the environments. I wrestled in middle school, and I tell you, some of those could benefit from increased sterilization efforts.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that this is a sport that where if you have just a little bit improved testing, especially among those coaches, those trainers, and the athletes themselves, you could do it safely. Again, that would presume some sort of everybody's being responsible and not leaving their respective social bubbles of this team. But I think if those trainers and select few were tested reliably, you could do it. But it's red for me.
It's hard. It's really hard on a college campus, and that's what we're talking about right now. Not the Olympic setting. Yeah,
you're totally right. Ice hockey.
It's a big red. It's just a big red. I mean, it's indoors. There's lots of inadvertent checking, although in the NHL there's a lot of checking. And it's just simply the gear. The gear just gets loaded down with sweat, blood and I mean all kinds of stuff. I hate to be that gross, but you just think about, what when they come off the ice, how drenched they are.
Absolutely. I mean, it's maybe the toughest sport next to water polo, of course, but just kidding.
Yeah.
No, it's a red light for me too. The only thoughts that I had to make it safer is players are wearing helmets with a partial face covering. Could you extend that? Maybe, but you're right. Just based on the amount of contact and the amount of sweat and sort of bodily materials that are in other pieces of the ice or their equipment. Yeah, it's one of the most contact-filled sports we have, so I can't go anything less than red.
And I'll just add one other small thing that we have not talked about, but that is consistent amongst all of these team sports, and that's the use of a mouth guard. And how often is that mouth guard flying out of your mouth?
Yeah, in hockey quite a bit.
Picked up by somebody, right? So
that's a good point. Yeah, we had them in water polo too. Not a lot of players wear them, but yeah, that's a really good point, Karen. No, it doesn't help the case.
Doesn't help. No.
Couple optimism sports coming up. The first one is rifle.
Oh yeah. Again, if it's got good circulation, right, and the athlete is responsible for his or her own equipment, and the coach refrains from touching and guiding and things like that, I think it's possible. I give it a green.
I'm with you. I'm green. Now, this is where I sheepishly admit my father was a sportsman, so I may or may not have in my possession several long rifles. But in any case, I do have some experience. I've been to target ranges, and it's really easy to create distance because a lot of times these environments are premised around some sort of physical separation between you and other shooters. So yeah, I think that it's pretty much a green light. It's outdoors generally. I do not know of a lot of indoor rifle ranges. I just don't. So I really tried to educate myself a lot about intercollegiate rifle. We're not talking about a huge amount of teams, by the way.
Right.
It's a green light. It's already an individual sport, has that going for it.
I think the NRA would be happy with our decision.
Oh boy, that's pandemics make for strange bedfellows. Is that
that's for sure.
Appropriate? The next one I have, Karen, and you can now tell me if this is sort of a sport that's emerging or a quasi club, but skiing.
It's regional, obviously, because you got to have snow and mountains to be able to do it.
Of course.
I think you've got a really good shot at having skiing. I think it really depends on the resorts, the comfortableness with bringing outsiders in on a consistent basis, because again, it's not your ski resort, it's usually the local ski resort, so they've got to be comfortable enough with all their cleaning standards to be able to get it up to par. I would give it a yellow green. Yeah,
I'm with you on that. I think I put down green just because it is outdoors. It's already individual. So yeah, I don't mean that. I love, and this is something again that you've been talking about all these sports is that don't use your own facilities. The facilities themselves are some variety of a risk factor. So you have to put that into your calculus overall.
Right.
Totally.
Right. Exactly.
The next one I got, now this is get back into the world of aquatics, swimming and diving. And it's complicated. It's swimming and diving.
Yes.
And so to me, swimming is like a red light. I'm sort of a little yellow on the whole enterprise, but practicing swimming entails breathing, and you're swimming really closely to a lot of other people. I think I gave swimming diving, by the way, overall a yellow light. You can limit how many swimmers there are per lane or have empty lanes in between swimmers. So it's not impossible. It's going to be really difficult to do in terms of pool time, training. I mean, this is a year that across all of sport, we're not going to see a lot of records being broken, just because of how difficult it is to train, to practice in this environment. So I think swimming is possible. You can't have multiple people in a lane with each other. It's just not going to work. You're breathing too close to one another. Diving, however, I think is a green light. I don't see much problem there. Diving can be indoors. And by the way, pools throughout the country, some are outdoor, some are indoor. That is a risk factor, back to what we said about facilities. I mean, the only thing that I think divers will give is you can't really hang in the hot tub as much. Pre or post dive. We see those divers in the Olympics. There's always sort of a hot tub or a lukewarm pool waiting area that looks like a grotto or something. And you can't have people in the grotto as much or as dense as you once did. That's the one caveat I'd say.
So I'm kind of leaning towards yellow-red only because most of the times when aquatic facilities are built, except for the really new ones, they're built with small locker rooms because lockers, the idea is to get the clothes off and get out on the deck and start doing it. So there's space on the deck. But again, it's that choke point of coming in and out of the locker rooms and how clean they are. The other piece, and maybe you know this, Ross, I don't, but do we know anything about humidity in COVID? Do we know anything about the humidity of the pool environment and if it accelerates spread at all? I haven't read anything.
It's a really good question. This is where I wish I did more epidemiological research prior to this pod, but I'm not going to say too much about that because I'm not an expert, and so I don't want to say something that's being wrong. I do not. I'll say that Philadelphia or Pennsylvania, it is really humid out right now. But this is, I think, we have a risk of going back into sort of the administration's federal administration's guidance of putting bleach into you or something like that. I just don't want to go there. I don't want to go to recommendation. Where I think there was a belief at one point that it would just die out in the summer, and clearly that has not happened with COVID. Yeah. And basically, what I say about trends, it could get worse in the winter because a lot of people are hanging indoors.
Yeah.
You might hear things about the 1918 flu, and so forth. But I do not know much about humidity. I can't really assess.
So again, that's what makes me more cautious. So I'm thinking red, yellow, maybe some orange. I'm going with orange on that
one. Okay, great. I think I'd yellow overall. But I also separated swimming and diving. I don't know if that's cheating, but maybe, I know this is possible, Karen. Could they just do a diving team? Could they just do diving?
They could. Have they ever? No. It's oftentimes where you have a swimming team without a diving team, but it's very rare that you have a diving team without a swimming team.
Right. Well, we'll see. This is a very strange year. Maybe some time for different ideas. Indoor track and field.
So I got to give it a strong red. Strong red. It's a very tightly run races around these banked indoor tracks, and you're jockeying and elbowing, not unlike some of the cross country things that I used earlier, but now you're inside and there's hardly any room for spectators. So if you bring even in, support staff and visiting team folks, there's nowhere for people to stand except in the middle infield, which then puts people less than 6 feet apart from one another. So it becomes really hard to find places to warm up, to sit down, to stretch out. It's not conducive to having that social distancing. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I had to do some research on the difference between indoor and outdoor track and field. I thought I knew what it was, but I think my sort of surface reaction was it has indoor in the name of the sport, which is a risk factor. So once I looked more into it, once I talked with you a little bit, I was sort of yellow but unsure, but I'm going to defer to you and just go with red. That's overwhelming in terms of the argument.
Yeah, it's tough.
The last one I have for the winter is wrestling, men's wrestling.
Oh my goodness.
And do you want to go ahead?
Wrestling is starting to be added on campuses as well. So it's a sport where they're trying to see growth on the women's side as well. But it's a hard red for either gender. It's a hard red. There's just too many ways to share unless you have a bubble. And again, we can't have college sports in a bubble. So that's where I go with this.
Yeah, I said probably red too. It's just extremely close contact. Again, a bubble is one thing, but if you had really rapid testing, if you had a really improved testing infrastructure where you get results, you could take and get results really quickly. If you could isolate individual players, coaches, that would really improve the safety of that sport. Kind of similar to what we're talking about with some gymnastics. But yeah, sparring and practice, there's just so much you can get from members of what can be really big teams. So red for me too.
All right.
So I think that's it.
Let's move quickly through the spring sports.
Yeah, for the winter, I had the 3 greens were rifle, fencing, and skiing. 3 yellow, 4 red. Spring, the first one is baseball and softball.
Yeah. Well, we're seeing baseball played right now. Unfortunately, as you mentioned, the Phillies have got a team they faced yesterday that has now 14 positive tests on the roster.
And 2 coaches.
That's right. So there's a lot of things that have to be done, again, off the field that keeps the players and the coaches and the rest of the staff safe. And that gets into square footage in the locker room and training rooms and hitting tunnels and all those kinds of things. So I would say it's a yellow at this point. I really would.
Again, we're agreeing. I had yellow too. So Major League Baseball isn't doing a great job right now. I mean, big roster sizes, they're not in a bubble. This is one of the few professional leagues that are not doing any sort of biosecure environment. But it is a sport that there is some spatial distance on the field. Even catchers and batters and umpires are pretty far. It doesn't look very far apart on TV. I don't think they're 6 feet apart, but in any case, those players, or at least the umpire or the catcher, are already wearing a mask. You could improve on that. I think this is my one sort of added thing we haven't talked about yet, but it's a spitting sport, especially for the men.
Sport. And they're supposed to, but again, it's old habits. You go back to what you do when you're competing, right? What calms your nerves? You get into some of these habits. Yeah.
Sure. I mean, so there would need to be some cultural change there.
Yes. Yes. And I'm going to push back. I think having that home plate umpire lurking over the catcher's shoulder is a problem.
Maybe you could reposition them. At one point, the Major League like technology back in the 90s, there was this QuestTech technology. There was like a computer umpire. Maybe it's time to bring back QuestTech in the name of safety. I don't know.
Oh my gosh! Yet another reason that people are getting moved out of jobs by technology. But that's a whole nother discussion.
Think about that. That's great. Yeah, I mean, you also mentioned with water polo players being close together. In this case, the dugout, you'd have to space them out there as well. That needs to be looked at too.
Same thing.
Next one is golf. What do you think, Karen?
I think it's very doable. I think, again, it depends on the comfort of the facility you're playing on, because oftentimes you're playing in local facilities. But I think we're seeing that people can play it comfortably as long as they're responsible about, not sharing carts and not sharing common tools. But I think golf has a real shot. So I'm going to give it a green.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with golf too. It's outdoor. It's individual. Yeah, I mean, we're seeing professional golf not have too many issues. Testing helps that even more. So yeah, green light for me.
Sure.
All right. And I'm going to defer to you this, Karen, just because of its similarity to field hockey, but lacrosse.
Boy, I'll tell you, I got to give it a pretty hard red on the med side and a pretty an orange on the women's side, only because the women's game tends to be more spread out. The men's game, of course, plays with helmets, shoulder pads, elbow guards. And it's, it's a physical sport by nature. You're designed to lean in and attack. So I got to say, and I'll go back to the turf again, because athletes in lacrosse go digging for ground balls, go lifting up stuff to try to get underneath the ball. And we don't know enough yet about these turfs as to what they hold in terms of viruses.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm going to defer to you on that, but I was envisioning red. I had just a tentative red myself, just because, again, so much contact and also pretty big team sizes.
Yes, exactly. Outdoors.
So it is mostly outdoors. It has that going for it.
Yes, right.
Also outdoors is rowing.
Wow.
This is sort of new to me. I didn't have a lot of exposure to rowing growing up. Even there's some really good teams on the West Coast where I'm from. Clearly, it's an outdoor sport. It has that going for it.
Well, again, you got to think about where they can train, and ergs can be done individually. So a lot of rowing teams right now are training remotely, which is fine. And there's certainly a sense that you can get into a single scull or a pairs situation. But college rowing is about the big boats, right?
The 4s and the 8s. Yeah.
And so how you pull that off, I don't know in this environment, because that you need that same group to train day in and day out. Again, if they were isolated and protected and all that kind of thing, I could see it. But they would need to be together a lot, and I don't know how you create that pod without injecting COVID into it.
I also wonder if it's safer that they're all facing each other's backs, except for the coxman, who could wear a mask. I don't know how the voice would project wearing a mask, so they need to work that out.
Yeah.
But I have yellow, just I'm not sure about these variables. Is it safer to be breathing on someone's back? Certainly it is, as opposed to their face. I think you can do things to improve the sport like that. I had yellow, but unless you're, I'm amenable either way.
The only thing I would say is once you get going, you're going at a pretty good clip. You're actually, when you're breathing hard, your breath is going to go backwards because of the wind.
Oh my God, that's right.
Back behind you. So that's what I'm concerned about. But like I said, with the sport of field hockey, perhaps you could make some modifications to not be so dependent on 4s and 8s. Maybe there's a way to do it that way.
Yeah. I thought you were saying about the individuals and the pairs. That's one way to do it.
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. Well, probably red, maybe yellow, hopefully. And
Yeah,
this is a spring sport too. We're in the spring.
true.
Hopefully things will improve in the spring.
Yes, exactly right. Exactly right.
Okay, tennis.
I'm giving it a strong green. I really am. I think what we're seeing down in West Virginia right now with the Greenbrier Resort with the World Team Tennis, which is a team sport, they are all next to each other, but they're in a bubble. In college tennis, that you play your matches consecutively. So the players, your one singles will play, and your twos and threes will all play at the same time on parallel courts. So you're not gathered together. So you can use your own balls if you wanted to, so that you're not touching each other's tennis balls.
True.
And you can basically keep the sitting away from each other. So I'm giving it a green.
Even doubles?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can make it work. Yeah.
Yeah, I had yellow. I mean, obviously singles is going to be safer. You're pretty distant. You do have that whistle issue similar to volleyball, so we'd have to think about that a little bit. But yeah, it's definitely.
You don't use the whistle in college tennis, so you don't have to worry about that.
No, that's right. You're just a line judge.
Right.
Or you got the umpire. Right.
And a lot of matches actually that you just call your own lines. So because they can't afford to pay for a line judge. Or
I just changed the tally to green. You've convinced me. I couldn't think. I mean, it's definitely not red. I thought of yellow just because of doubles, or because you do have some. Once you're volleying at the net, it can get pretty close. But yeah, I think it makes sense to be green. I think that could happen. I see a path forward for tennis.
I do too. Yes.
All right, this might take a little bit. We'll try to get through it. Outdoor track and field.
So you have more space, right? The track is longer. The lanes, the idea of staying in your lanes is somewhat consistent, particularly for the shorter races, the 100s, the 200s. When you go to field sports, there's spacing there, whether you've got the pole vault or the high jump or the shot put or the javelin. You might just have to really think about the size of your events. In other words, instead of having an all-comers match where anybody who wants to jump into the 800 can, maybe you say we're only going to have 4 in the 800, and that's how we get this thing off. So you shrink your numbers of competitors. So I'm in the yellow-green if they make some adjustments.
Yeah, I think it kind of depends. Sort of like what we do with swimming and diving. I think the field of track and field is okay. If we're talking like hammer throw, discus, we're talking about like pole vault, long. It's about equipment. It's all the same considerations that we mentioned before. Track seems harder because you are running so close next to people, breathing really, really hard. They've been doing some interesting things with technology, though. Did you get the story? I think it was Justin Gatlin who broke this record. He almost evidently broke Usain Bolt's record, but it turns out they put the starting blocks in the wrong place. So instead of the 200 meter, he only ran 185 meters. But that was the innovation. They had this remote track and field competition where everybody's running on these individual tracks, and I don't know if it's being broadcast by Zoom or something. But in any case, the error there was human error. But you could do some innovative things to keep teams apart or to record official times and just stagger it out, I would think. So
yeah,
there could be some innovation there.
Or just invite fewer people to your meet too,
Sure. So you're saying we're not going to see Penn relays anytime soon. I'm thinking
Penn relays might be out another year, unfortunately.
Might be. Yeah. It's spring, but yeah. That's good. All right. And then the next one, a major growth opportunity for beach volleyball. I have it at least. I mean, I think yellow, Karen. I mean, limited only by the amount of landlocked states we have that have beaches. Now, a lot of places have sand. So, but I think beach volleyball is definitely better than volleyball.
I'm with you. Although I'm going green. It's outdoors. Green. You generally play it in the sunshine. You don't play it in downpours. There's a lot of spacing in the strategy of the two players working, with each other. I'm going green all the way.
It has that going for it too. Small teams, again, with these small teams or individual sports, these are great candidates for testing, making a huge difference, which hopefully by spring, that'll at least be in place. Let's go. great sport, beach
Yeah,
volleyball.
absolutely. Absolutely.
And then the last one, is this a sport? I did not realize that equestrian was on the NC2A's website. Is that a thing, or?
Well, they don't have an NCAA championship, but there are a number of schools that have, for whatever reason, access to horses and barns and trailers and that type of thing. So they do compete in it. Now, you've done a little bit of research on the horses. I myself would be more worried about the athletes, but the human athletes. But I don't have as many concerns about that from a human athlete perspective. But what do you think from the equine perspective?
Well, yeah, I did a little bit too much research on equestrian. My neighbors are veterinary researchers, and so I spent a lot of time chatting with them about this particular bullet, and a little bit too much time also on the American Veterinary Medicine Association webpage, talking about transmission to pets. A lot of concerns about doggies and kitties, with which there's been a few, and apparently there's been a huge outbreak in mink farms in the Netherlands. So I think I'm straying dangerously away from college athletes here. But don't try to transport mink manure anytime soon, because there's an international ban on it apparently. But back to college students riding in horses in competition, I would say green light. I mean, it's outdoors, it's individual. It's the kind of thing where I've seen on TV, and it's amazing that there's some institutions that have access to these things.
Yeah.
But I think in terms of human to human transmission, it's a lot of the same things you talked about with facilities. Sort of making sure that coaches and sort of the trainers are all protected. But horses don't seem to pose a risk either in terms of absorbing nor transmitting COVID. So that's good news.
Thank goodness. Man, oh man, I would hate to have anything happen to the horses.
Can't have that. All right, so that was 8 sports total, 1 red, 4 yellow, and a couple green ones, tennis and golf. So that was the spring, and that's the roundup.
Okay, so we're feeling good about individual sports or small numbers of sports where you de-densify the population. Ideally, you want to either be outside or you want to be in a place that has good circulation where there's lots of spacing. And most importantly, you want to think about everything that happens to get the athletes into the pool or into the court or onto the field, those choke points in terms of locker rooms, in terms of training rooms where athletes can easily pile up like an expressway log jam at 5 o'clock on the Schuylkill.
It's a great point, Karen. And the things that could really turn around the landscape for NC2A sports are, like the rest of us, a vaccine, of course. But short of that, really quick testing that will even sort of help the individual and sort of smaller team sports, especially. I think those are things that could be brought into, and we'll see if there's going to be innovation. I'm really interested to see what these sports do in terms of modifying rules, maybe just for hopefully this season, if not longer, in terms of making their sports safer in this pandemic environment.
Sometimes you got to do what you got to do to be able to play what you love.
Yeah. And overarching all of this, I was talking to a colleague who's a trustee today. This could happen, and this is what we didn't talk about, but it's entirely possible that an outbreak could happen at any college or university, and that college or university, hey, we have to go back to what we were doing in March. Sorry about that.
Yeah.
So overshadowing all of this concern about sports are larger concerns that can happen in a residential campus or even a commuter campus.
Absolutely. Well, Ross Akins, thank you so much bringing all your health perspective to the conversation. It was a great conversation, and we'll keep our eyes open on whether they take our advice.
It's a lot of fun, Karen. Thanks so much.
Okay.